our businesses live and die like on how good our relationships are, basically. Anybody in the world could be your direct client, right? Most of them don't actually know what motion design is. I'm all about that. I'm like, how can I make this quicker? How can I make it easier for myself?
So Hayley, why don't we start, you've got a lot of students and your whole thing is just helping motion designers learn how to get work and make money and get more clients and stuff. And, the last few years have been pretty weird. We had this like crazy boom during COVID and then the economy kind of tanked. And for a while, it seemed like nobody was booked and everyone was out of work and there was all these layoffs. And now I think it kind of feels like things are slowly getting better, but you pay really close attention to this. So I'd love to hear your take on how are things going right now, just in general for the industry?
Yeah, I think obviously I've seen this too. I feel like, you probably talked about this loads, but what happened was there was a bit of a boom during COVID because everything went to, from live action to animation. And we were all panicking to start with, I think, when COVID happened, because we were like, oh, what's going to happen? Is there going to be no work? And then that shift happened. And I think that brought a lot of people into the industry. Like, that's been discussed a lot. We know that. So I think what's kind of happened after that as well is there's been a little bit of a kind of correction on that. But then also with the economy and stuff like that, obviously I'm not an economist, I don't know, but like that's kind of my point of view. And I think I've heard you talk about this sort of thing before as well. So I think that's what happened. There definitely was less work. I think 2023 was probably the worst year on record for freelancers. Certainly from what, I was hearing from the industry and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. In terms of like, what I sort of saw working, which is maybe more helpful, is I think that people who are thinking about more their business as like how they can sell different products maybe to specific types of clients, like more direct clients and things like that. People who shifted in that direction during like 22, 23 seem to have gained a lot of traction and seem to have done very well. I think generally the whole thing around relying on referrals just kind of disappeared a little bit overnight. And then we definitely saw at Motion Hatch more and more people coming to us, obviously, because we talk a lot about marketing and all of that kind of stuff. And I think people, maybe they took it a little bit for granted. I don't know. But, like they thought, oh, it's okay. Referrals are always going to come in. And, the bad thing with that is, and the bad thing with referrals is that you're not in control of it, right? You're not in control of where your referrals are coming from. You're kind of you're sort of taking more of a passive approach. And the main thing that I teach everyone who comes to Motion Hatch is to take more of an active approach. And even if that's an active approach in how you get referrals, right? So maybe I don't know, I'm like losing the plot. Am I going too far on in like?
Well, no, this is good because I wanted to see how your experience and what you're hearing kind of lines up with what I'm hearing, because I hear a lot of the same things you do. But I know you're just much more focused on the business side of things. And so I think what you're describing is how I would describe the same kind of thing. I want to dig in on something. So you mentioned that one of the things I wanted to get into in this conversation is like, what's working now? Mm-hmm. What was working that isn't working anymore? And you mentioned that motion designers that they sort of shift their mindset to think about how can I create products for these customers, right? These potential brands and stuff. But what do you mean by products? Because my brain instantly goes, oh, you mean like a piece of software, a plugin? Like, what are we talking about? What do you mean by product?
Yeah, so I think the best way to think about it, it's sort of, I guess, not really a product in that sense. It's more of maybe like more of a productized service. I don't know whether, many people will have heard of that, but essentially if you have a productized service, you are constraining it by certain boundaries. One of them will be time, like how long is it taking you to do this? One of them will be the price. So the time frame is always the same. The price is always the same. and also what you're delivering is always the same. So that's like very different to custom work. And I think that's not what we're used to in the industry, but I've seen people do it very well. One of my students, Luke Stanley, he started a business making motion brand guidelines for people. Now, I don't know whether he exactly does it like a productized service now, but essentially he's delivering like the same offering to people over and over again, right? Which makes it so much easier to market because you know what you're offering and people understand it a lot better, because also with motion brand guidelines, obviously a lot of business owners understand they need like brand guidelines. They need to be putting themselves out there and using graphic design and stuff like that. Motion is kind of a new aspect of that. So I think that's where he's been successful, because he's sort of going off the back of most business owners realize that they need to have some sort of brand guidelines. So I think that was like a really smart, clever thing to do. So I think going more along those lines is really helpful, because then it's easier to market yourself, right? If you know who you're talking to and who your ideal clients are and also what you're selling them, it makes it much easier. I think to get to that point is the really, really difficult bit.
Yeah. Okay. So let me make sure I understand this. I'll kind of walk through what was going on in my brain as you're explaining all this. I think it's really cool. So I don't know, 15 years ago, motion design wasn't as well known. And so you kind of had to spread your client base out a little bit more. And so when you say, doing custom work, I mean, that's kind of what I think most of my career was. It was, there's a client and they need a thing. It's completely different from what the last job was. And I have to give them a custom bid, a custom schedule. Everything's new every single time. But now, I recently interviewed this guy, Connor Hankel, who he's been really good at marketing himself as the guy you go to when you need multiple screens with content on them for your arena or your stadium for sports. Like very, very niche down. And he's got this very strict process he follows for onboarding clients, and he sends them a Loom, and he's got like all of these tools he's built up to automate that. And so to me, it seems like there's kind of two things you're talking about. One is niching down. And figuring out, okay, what industry or what type of client is not being served. And then it's building a process around that that's repeatable versus every time I get a client email, it's basically I'm starting from scratch. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's like different ways you can go about that, right? It doesn't always have to be like a certain industry or something like that. Like it can be, and they can be very good, lucrative niches, but it can be more like Luke, where it's like almost like it's like a type of product, like a type of motion design, right? Or it can be like how you actually work, like what is your process. That can also be a selling point. Like when I think of someone like Kevin Rapp, we interviewed on the Motion Hatch podcast. I'm not sure if you've interviewed him as well, but like he has been so successful because he has a different process of how he works to all of these different people, and it appeals to a certain type of client. And I think, this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the people who've been successful. I think they're really being more strategic about how they present motion design to people who aren't necessarily used to hiring motion designers, because I think that's where the problem has come in the past few years, is where the work was usually coming from has sort of dried up. So then it requires people to be a bit more innovative about, who are the other people who could use motion design. And I have a lot of people who come to me and say, Hayley, I'd love to work with more direct clients. And I'm like, that's awesome. But who exactly are they? Because anybody in the world could be your direct client, right? Most of them don't actually know what motion design is. I went to like a networking event the other day. It was like a general business one. And I explained to them what I did, and then they understood it. And then they all said, oh, I could really use a motion designer in my business. Before I met you, I didn't even know what motion design was or why it would be useful to me. So I think, this is what people need to start to think about. And it's not for everyone, right? I don't think everyone needs to do this or wants to do it. I think there's some other things that we can talk about later about how you can be more strategic and take more action on a marketing front that doesn't involve this. But if you're asking me about who I think has, prospered or who do I think has done the best in the past few years, it's definitely more along these lines.
Gotcha. That's really awesome. And I've heard of Kevin. We haven't had him on the show, but maybe we will in the future. But I've heard he's killing it. Maybe you could add a little detail. So like, what does he do that's different that, clients are interested in?
Yeah, well, I definitely recommend go and checking out the podcast that we did with him.
Absolutely. Yeah, good plug. Nice.
Because obviously he can explain it much better than I can, but I'll explain it briefly from my understanding of what he does. So basically, he was working with a lot of tech clients. And in the tech industry, what they like to do is they like to test lots of different like marketing all the time. And what used to happen with motion design is, we used to be like, oh, you're launching a product, you need an explainer video. Like everyone's aware of that. Everyone's aware of like the explainers and all that kind of stuff. But then what was happening, in the tech industry, because they don't really, if they put like one explainer video out and then it kind of doesn't hit, then they're like, oh, what can we do now? So what he started to do was say, okay, instead of me delivering you this like, I don't know, like 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute explainer video, why don't I deliver you these like little pieces of content or like a content system so that you can actually like reuse this, break it up. You can try it in different ways. You can try it in different aspect ratios and all of this kind of stuff. I think there's also like smart tools out there that we can use now to provide this type of stuff to our client. But the benefit of doing it that way and kind of giving them more systems that they can reuse and they can test stuff means that they can work in a way that they were used to working, which was like experimenting with messaging and testing, different types of content and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's what worked really well for him because he understood their problem really well of what they were trying to do. And he was able to almost like deliver more to them for less, but then he managed to charge more for that. So I feel like that was why it seems like it's so successful.
That's brilliant. Yeah, it's making me think that, when I was freelance, all of my clients hired me because they knew what I did. They're like, oh, I need a video editor or I need a motion designer. But when you're doing this, you're not going after clients that understand that. They know I need some social media clips that I can play with, right? And in their mind, they may never say the word animator or motion designer in their mind. So then as a motion designer, how do you market to them? Because it's probably, you're speaking almost a different language sometimes than you're used to speaking to like studios and ad agencies that really get this stuff.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about LinkedIn here as well, because I feel like this will help also answer this question because there's some stuff that's shifted. So like, I've been talking about LinkedIn for a long time. I'm like, everyone should get
it. You were early on it.
Exactly. I'm like, I don't know whether I'm to blame for everyone going over there. But anyway, so I feel like LinkedIn was really good, right, when it started, because what would happen was LinkedIn really wanted like content. They wanted people to put posts out and hardly anyone was posting anything. So as a motion designer, if you were early on there and if you went on there first and you started posting, you would just get clients from LinkedIn just from posting because the algorithm would show it to like lots of different type of people, right? But what's happening now, I think within the last year or so, maybe a little bit before that, they changed the algorithm so that basically if you're on there and you're talking about motion design, which is what most motion designers are talking about, right? If they're talking about their work or behind the scenes or whatever, if you're saying like, oh, this is what I did with motion design, hello other motion designers, like they're going to show it to other motion designers. They're not going to show it to other people. Because they've got more content on there now. They're trying to, a little bit like YouTube, where they're trying to attract the people that it thinks that would be attracted by this, right? Which makes sense. But the problem that's happening now, and I think this is related to your question somewhat, is that because we're like always talking to like motion designers or like animation studios and stuff like that too. So like there can be a benefit to it. But I think if you're looking for direct clients and you're doing that, then that's not really working anymore. So you have to be more strategic in the way that you craft like even your social media posts to make sure that you're trying to speak to your ideal client. Now, there's a few problems with this. One is some clients on LinkedIn are there and they're hiring people, but they're not very active, right?
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do then is think about how can we post different types of posts, but also posts that appeal to our ideal client, right? So I'm talking here, just to be clear, about if you want to go after more direct clients. And I'd say even maybe like agencies, like if you're trying to attract like creative directors and stuff like that, and they're not necessarily following the motion design industry stuff, that probably can still apply to those people. So how I like to think about it is almost in different phases, right? And I've got this framework that I call the 4 A's freelance funnel, and it can apply to your whole business, but it can also apply to social media. And I think it's quite a good way to, introduce everyone to this, to talk about social media first. So it goes awareness, attraction, action, and advocacy, right? And I'm sure you're aware that there are marketing funnels out there, and it's not too different from that. But what I like about it is it's 4 A's. So it's very easy to remember. So think about awareness, attraction, action, advocacy. So what we're trying to do with this and how we create a social media strategy around this is because you're doing different types of things with your posts. So if I was doing an awareness type of post, I might talk about general industry trends, or I might talk about things that are happening in the motion design industry and stuff like that, because most of the people who follow me might be motion designers right now. So then you're going to get more engagement and more likes, and hopefully LinkedIn will push it out to more people. But definitely when you go below that, you want to be talking more directly to your ideal clients. And it kind of is quite tough at the moment, because what I feel like is happening, people are making this switch, but then they're not necessarily always seeing a lot of the engagement, but then they might get a client out of it, because clients are like kind of watching, but they don't always like and comment and things like that. So you might find when you create an attraction post, so attraction post would usually be something a bit more detailed, like behind the scenes or something like that. Like you can talk about your own work. It's less of a like, hey, what's going on in the industry, or like something that's going to attract a lot of people. It's more like, how can I attract the clients that I want through like showing my process, through showing behind the scenes, like all that kind of stuff. You're probably going to get like less engagement, comments and likes on those things. There's ways around doing that, and we can talk about that if you want. But what you will get is more clients. And then what you want to do is the last type of post, which I feel like this is what everyone is creating now, and I find it very frustrating, is like a call to action post, right? So that's in the action section. So I feel like everyone's like, hey, this is my availability. Hey, this is my work. And, it's very simple. It's not giving me a reason to get involved with your post. It's not giving me a reason to engage. It's definitely an important part, because if you're always just doing kind of content for the sake of it, like to attract people, to get more awareness and engagement, but not actually ever giving them a call to action, then I think that's, too far the other way. But there has to be like a little bit of balance. I think that, it's quite off-putting when people just post their availability all the time on LinkedIn, So I think if we mix in some of these more awareness and attraction type posts, then that gives, obviously, everyone knows more what we do. The awareness ones pull in more people generally, and hopefully your ideal client as well. Obviously, you can be more specific with that. But what I see work quite well, from people like Luke and Kevin Rapp and stuff like that, is kind of mixing it up a little bit, because obviously their existing audience is probably mostly motion designers. So they still kind of want to get them involved to a certain extent, but then they want to do very specific posts that are also attracting their clients. And then, we can talk about advocacy, but mainly advocacy. I kind of learned this from our friend Pat Flynn. So I don't know whether anyone's like heard of him, but he wrote a book called Superfans. And I thought it was really interesting, because it talked a lot about like how you can create fans of yours, really. And I think that that's often a piece missing in a traditional marketing funnel is, how can you create advocates and fans of your clients to help you to get more work? And one way to do that is obviously get testimonials for them and share that. I think proof is becoming a bigger thing. And like when I look at someone's work, and maybe I'm looking at another motion designer's work, and I think, okay, which one do I think is better? If you have some more testimonials and you kind of have similar work, then you're probably going to get the job. Got
it. Okay, this reminds me of that Gary Vee book that came out several years ago. I think it was called Jab, Jab, Uppercut or something like that.
Jab, Jab, Right Hook.
That's right, right hook. I couldn't remember if it was right hook or uppercut. Thank you for correcting me. But no, it's like if you put out a call to action post, I love that framework. What is it? Awareness, attention.
Awareness, attraction, action, advocacy.
Attraction, that's right. Yeah. Okay, cool. But a lot of people skip right to action because when you're freelancing, you don't have work, it feels very, very urgent, and you just want to fix it as quickly as you can. And then my guess is that the problem is if that post that you make, hey, I have some availability, here's my website, please give me a call. If that's the first post somebody sees of yours, then you're not making the best first impression. If that's the fifth post, because you've been doing these other things and layering in the other A's, then I don't know, there's something about like it makes you feel more real, like, oh, this person really is a professional. Like I can trust them a little bit more because they're not just begging for work, right? Is that kind of the psychology of it, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's, and I think you mentioned this in your book as well, the whole like know, like, trust. We can't just jump straight into a relationship with people, right? Like, I'll tell you a funny story, actually. So the other week, like a few months ago in my coaching program, Balanced Business Bootcamp, one of the students was saying, okay, so I'm taking lots of action, because we like everyone to do that. And he was like, what I'm doing is I'm emailing these people at these studios and I'm saying, hey, let's go for a coffee. And I was like, no, I'm like, you're going too quickly. It's like,
foreplay.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's like, don't jump in there straight away. Like you can't just go like straight away in for the kill almost, And I was like, think about if you're like dating someone, right? You don't like immediately just go out with them usually, So I feel like we need to think more of these kind of awareness and attraction parts of our business as like, how am I drawing people more towards me, instead of always like shouting, it's a little bit like, I talk a lot about inbound marketing versus outbound marketing. So in inbound marketing, you're drawing people to you like a magnet. And when you're doing outbound marketing, obviously you're kind of doing more of the stuff that's like interrupting them. You're like sort of shouting about your work, that kind of thing. I think it's good to have like a mixture of both. And this is what this really allows you to do. And it makes sure that you're not just concentrating on one of the areas, because I feel like that's when you're not warming your clients up enough and you're sort of just sending loads of cold emails and you're not really kind of like building that relationship, which, we both know like our businesses live and die like on how good our relationships are, basically.
Right. So let's get back into sort of like the macro scale of this too. So, okay, so we've gone through like the economy and what happened, and here we are, and certain things that were working are no longer working, and then you have to try new things.
Yes.
Overall, one thing I've been really curious about, and you may know this or you may not, but I'm going to ask you. So during the COVID bubble, and it's clear now that there was like a bubble in play, and everyone was booked all the time. You couldn't get anybody. Everybody raised their rates. And rates got way more expensive. And some of that was probably needed because rates had been pretty stagnant for a while. But there were people charging exorbitant amounts and getting it because there was no one else to do the work. Everyone was booked. Has that come back down to earth a little bit? Are people still able to charge what they were, 2-3 years ago? Or have rates come down a little bit?
Yeah, so... Yeah, this is a hard one for me to answer, right? And I think this is because I'm always the person that's telling everyone to raise their rates. So I think it's tough. So I haven't necessarily, and also it might be because like, obviously I'm mainly quite a lot of the time talking to our students and stuff like that. And I do speak to people in the wider community, but I just want to, make it clear, like, this is just my opinion. And obviously I can't be kind of, this is just
there's no lawyers watching. It's okay.
This is just what I'm, this is just what I kind of, my impression, right? I guess is what I should say. So basically, I didn't see anyone like lowering their rates, but I definitely did see sometimes, people who I think are like incredibly talented, who are charging quite a bit, which they absolutely deserve. And I think that they should be. And I'm always happy about that. I saw that sometimes they were the people that were struggling a bit because I think obviously budgets went down and things like that. So I didn't really see anyone like tackling that with lowering their rate. And, like I say, maybe it's because of my encouragement and things that we're doing in our programs. I just saw people like shifting what they were doing to get work, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I think that, I don't know, I tend to look at it as much as I can neutrally through just like, look, it's economics, right? You got supply, you got demand, and ideally you have a free market and you arrive at the correct rate for most people. And the demand just shot through the roof during COVID and the supply wasn't there.
Yes.
And I think you're right. I think a lot of people did jump into motion design in those years because they saw, like there was kind of a gold rush for it, and NFTs really made that accelerate.
Yeah.
And so then the supply caught up, and so maybe, I don't know, there may be people out there. I mean, I've heard stories, but like there may be people out there whose rates are just kind of too high for what the market will bear right now. So that means they're just going to get booked less, right? Like there's people out there charging $1,500 a day that will get booked by some of the clients that need them if they're really specialized. But they'd probably get a lot more work if they were $800 a day or something like that. It's a tough pill to swallow. I'm just curious if you talk to anyone who kind of took a hard look in the mirror and been like, you know what, maybe I'm not worth $950 a day anymore, that kind of thing.
Well, what I would say to that, which I think is kind of interesting, is the people who are charging a lot, maybe they don't need to work as much because they're charging that much, right?
It's true.
So like this is always how I look at things, because maybe they could get more work if they lowered their rate. But what about if they, doubled their rate? That's quite extreme example, but you know what I mean? Like if you increase your rate and you need less work because of that, and maybe some of your clients that you don't like as much because, it tends to be the people who pay you less are always the most awkward to work with, the hardest to work with, that I've found anyway. So then if some of them drop away, as long as you can still sustain, what you need to make, as a living, and you kind of have an idea of what that is, then I think, that might be okay for some people. I'm not saying that's what's happened for everyone, but I'm just saying potentially, if you're charging a lot more, you don't need as much work. So it can kind of still potentially work out. I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. You need to know what I like to call it like your base rate. Like what do you need to make every month or every quarter, every year, so that you are okay. And then everything else above that is kind of like a bonus, right?
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned that, some of your students that are like amazingly talented motion designers, some of the best ones are the ones not getting booked. And I'm curious, maybe you could dig into that a little bit. Do you think it's because the clients that were booking them like just don't have the work anymore? Do you think that they had some tactic that was working that has stopped working and they haven't moved on? Like, why do you think really talented artists are not getting booked right now, and what should they be doing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that, I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is like speculation, you know what I mean? But like,
it's all speculation.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just, I just want to make sure people know that. But potentially, I think the like tech layoff stuff like had a big part of it. So what I kind of saw happening is like, as well as like a lot of people were made redundant from like big tech companies. That's bringing like a lot of high-end like talent back in the market as well. So then it's getting more competitive, not only on like sort of, I don't want to say lower end, but you see what I mean? Like maybe more junior people. And then it's also getting competitive on the high end as well. I don't think it's necessarily like they're doing something wrong, you know what I mean? Or like they've changed tactic or something like that. I think it's just, unfortunately, less workaround is just going to make it more difficult. I think the biggest thing that you can do if you're struggling to get work is make sure that you're taking action, right? Because I feel like a lot of times what can happen is you can kind of say, oh, well, this doesn't work how I used to do it. And then people aren't really sure what to do. But that's why we like teach people a lot of frameworks and stuff like that, because things change over time as well, right? I can't tell you like, oh yeah, LinkedIn's always going to get people clients. I think that's changing, and I try and keep everyone up to date on that. But what I also do is give people frameworks to work around, right? So what I would say is try and, look at this awareness, attraction, action, and advocacy, and make sure you're doing an action in each one of these stages, because I feel like that's what's helped our students the most. And I can put a worksheet on our website. I'll put it at motionhatch.com/School of Motion. So if you go there, you can download the worksheet. And then what you can do is, if you fill it in, you can make sure you're doing something at each one of these steps. And just by taking action and being more intentional about your marketing and about your strategy, I feel like that will be just really, really helpful. So in that worksheet as well, what we have in each stage, so like in the awareness stage, we have like, okay, what are you doing? Where are you doing? And how are you doing it? right? Because what I've found with, people in the community, with my students, with everyone, is it's not really that they don't know what they should be doing, right, in terms of marketing. Like, everyone has a sense of, yes, I need to spend time on my business. Yes, I need to market myself. That's not really the problem. What I found the issue for most people is just creating a system or a habit out of that, right? Because like most people know, okay, I can, make more people aware of me by posting on LinkedIn. I can create better case studies, and maybe I could pitch them to more, ideal direct clients that really align with them and show them the results and all this stuff. But it's all time, and it's all like having the time to do it, knowing what's going to work, what's the priority, right? So with this worksheet, what I think is really easy and simple is you just have one thing that you do in one section, right? So for example, like I said, in the awareness section, maybe you say, all right, I'm going to post on LinkedIn and I'm going to do it once a week. Cool. Okay. So that's like the what and the where. But like, how are you going to do that? Because it's easy for me to say that I'm going to post once a week on LinkedIn, but actually in practice, quite difficult, right, to be consistent. So then what I would say, okay, the how, maybe I'm going to every Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month at 8 a.m., I'm going to batch the rest of the month's posts. And then that's much more actionable and much more achievable, and definitely put it in your calendar, right? This is like what I find myself saying all the time. Put it in your calendar, otherwise you're not going to do it. Okay, so we just take each section like that. And then the next section in attraction, where people will be like, okay, I know I need to show more case studies to this type of client that I really want to work with. And I know that will help them to understand what I do. It will help them to show the results of this project I did or whatever, So then you say, okay, well, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to create 2 case studies. I've made it all actionable already because I'm like 2, I've put a number on it. When am I, where am I going to do that? Well, I'm obviously going to put it on my website, but what else I'm going to do? I'm going to break down each section of the case study and put that on social media. And then how am I going to do it? Well, I've booked myself for 2 hours every Thursday morning until October to get this done. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, let's make this super actionable so you're always working on your business, because this is what I found gets the best results for people. It's not actually that, sometimes maybe people don't understand as much about marketing, or it's more like the fear of putting yourself out there, not quite knowing what to do. But if you just do one little task almost in each section of these stages, then you're going to get closer to, what you want to achieve than if you just, didn't do anything or just did what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so you brought something up that I hear a lot, actually. I got a DM the other day from an artist that we featured in one of our videos, and he was like, thank you for featuring me. I've never been good at posting on social media. I don't really do it. And I think that that's a pretty common sentiment. It feels kind of gross to promote yourself. You feel like you're bragging, and it's like this head trash. And one of the things that, I'm immune to that now, but I used to feel that way when I started. And one of the things that really helped me was what you mentioned, which is batching. And a lot of people watching this may not really understand how that's possible. Maybe you could talk about some of the tools you use, and, and just to give a little more detail, if I get on LinkedIn and I post something, I'm also seeing the feed.
Yes.
And it's easy to get distracted and all of that. But people may not know, you don't actually have to log in to LinkedIn to post on LinkedIn, and there's some cool things that I'm sure you can get into.
Yes, and thanks for reminding me of that. So yeah, this is something I talk about a lot as well. So I'm currently using a tool called Taplio. Obviously, there's other tools available. It doesn't really matter what you use, but I think the best thing is something where you can create drafts, because that's what really helps me, because I have ideas all the time for posts. I'm like, oh, I had this coaching call with someone. They had this problem. Let's post about that. I had this chat with someone else. Let's post about that. But I'm not always in that mode where I'm going to create the whole post, right? So then I will just jump into Taplio, and it has a little draft section, and I'll put one sentence sometimes, or just the idea, right? And then when I come to the time that I'm going to batch all my posts, I'm like, okay, I've got in my calendar today, this morning, that I've got to batch 5 social media posts for LinkedIn, right? Then when I go into Taplio to write them, I've got 5 ideas already, or even 10 or whatever. And sometimes I chuck them out. Sometimes I'm like, oh no, I don't want to post that one. I don't think it's very good or whatever. But I've got starting points. And I feel like that's the biggest thing that helped me, because I'm really bad if I have to just do something. One, if I don't know when I'm doing it. And two, if I, have to think of the ideas on the spot. Like, that's not, it's hard, right? Everyone struggles with that. Mm-hmm. So that is like being the biggest thing that helps me. And then also, because you want to go on LinkedIn, you want to be commenting and engaging as well. When you set your post to go live, a little bit before that, you should go onto LinkedIn and you should start engaging and commenting with other people's posts. And then you should try and engage with your own. You're supposed to ideally do it in the first hour, but we don't always have to stick to all these things. I would say even if you could just set a timer for 20 minutes a day and be like, right, I'm going to make sure I go in and comment on my posts, comment on other people's posts. Like, just make it part of your business and don't, stress if it doesn't go perfectly. Like, I didn't post today. I got too busy. I didn't batch. My whole system slipped, but I know what the system is so that I can go back to it. Does that make sense? You don't have to be perfect all the time. You just have to be like 80% to get things done right.
What's the logic? Because that's really interesting. Going in a few 20 minutes before your post is scheduled, and just to make it clear to everybody, you write 5 posts, and then you say this one goes out next Tuesday, this one goes out next Thursday, this one, and it just automatically posts for you. And so you now know, okay, I've got these posts, they're already scheduled. I don't have to think about it. I could be asleep. I could be at the pub. Doesn't matter. They're going to post. But what is the advantage of going and commenting and being active on that platform a little bit before your post?
Yeah.
Right? Is there some...
So I've heard that it helps the algorithm and stuff like that. But the main thing for me is I figure if I'm going and commenting on other people's posts, they're more likely to follow that back to my profile, right? And then hopefully if they do it I just go on there 15 minutes before my post, comment on a few people's posts, maybe once or twice, they might follow back. And then I think that LinkedIn sometimes shows them your posts. But, I obviously, no one really knows what the algorithm's doing. But it seems to work pretty well. What I found is usually if I comment on someone else's post, then usually I'll find they comment more on my post. So it's kind of just I think that's part of being part of the community as well. You can't just be posting and then not engaging with other people and trying to be a good, helpful person in that community. And I've had loads of people who've been oh, I'm not sure about LinkedIn, social media is not really for me. And then they've literally just started commenting on people's posts or even on their ideal clients' posts. And then that's got them work, even without the posting part. You know what I mean? So I would just say, just give it a go, but this isn't a podcast about LinkedIn, right? What's more important is that you're doing something to make people aware of you. So another example of that could be going into a community, like a private community or something like that, where your ideal client is. So what comes to mind is my friend Holly. She's a branding expert and she does illustrations. And she's in a community with me, full of entrepreneurs. And then she basically changed her offer so that she could help entrepreneurs. And it was very specific. And now she's got loads of clients from that community because she's the only graphic designer, branding, illustrator person in there. Does that make sense? So you're kind of going in where your clients are. So it doesn't necessarily have to be LinkedIn. It could even be more in person, But as long as you're doing something to make more people aware of you, right? To grow your network, but being very intentional and very actionable in what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that tip because, social media, it's gotten so effective in the last few years at getting work, right? But it's inbound. And you already mentioned that you think you kind of need a blend of both inbound, posting and having a schedule and all that. And then also doing more traditional things like networking. Mm-hmm. How are you and your students finding sort of the old-fashioned things? You mentioned referrals, right? Asking clients for referrals or testimonials, or just doing, straight up cold emails and trying to build rapport that way, or DMs. Is that stuff still working? Do you still recommend people focus on that as well? Or, I see a lot of people, it seems like all of their work comes from inbound. Probably not at the studio level, but at a freelancer level, I think if you're good enough, you can pull that off.
Yes.
But I've always preached the outbound gospel. That was kind of how I I was successful as a freelancer. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think you ideally need to do a mix of both, right? And this is where the business and the marketing habits come in, right? And building systems and processes around this. Because it's all well and good me saying, oh yeah, you need your inbound strategy and your outbound strategy and all of this, right? That's overwhelming. So that's why I'm trying to say to everyone, you just need to do like these little mini actions, right? How can you break it down into small actionable steps, right? So yes, I think it's really important. One of the first things that we always end up doing with everyone is, have you got a CRM? You know, like, have you got a client relationship manager? You know, do you know like who your past clients are? Are you regularly keeping up with them? Obviously, like, your past clients is such an easy way to get like more work. It's just like keep in touch with them. You don't even have to be like, oh, I'm looking for work necessarily. You know, you just have to keep in touch with these people, right? So having a way to track that, I think, is really, really key. And maybe that's obvious to some people, but you'd be surprised how many people come to us and they still don't have this system in place. So you need to have them. And also what you can do, what I really like, is you can have them in the different stages of the funnel, right? So you can have in your awareness stage, in your CRM, you can have all the people who you want to work with who don't know who you are, right? So you could think about, right, let's put 10 people in there. Cool. Now I'm going to try and move those people into the attraction phase. You know, I'm going to try and move them over so that maybe I've had a conversation with them. Maybe I'm like commenting on their posts. Maybe I'm meeting them at a networking event. It doesn't matter what you're doing, right? You're just intentionally moving them closer to you. You know, you're sort of taking action to draw them closer to you. And then what you're going to do is obviously you want to try and turn them into a client so you can put them in the action part of the CRM, right? And then you're going to have all your past clients in the advocacy section because you want to be thinking about, how can I get referrals from these people? How can I get more work? How can I get more testimonials? You know, how can I, work with more strategic partners? Like all of this type of stuff. So that's what I really like about these systems and these frameworks, is because you can apply it across your whole business. And then you can just think about, okay, rather than having like 100 people on a list of people who I want to work with, how am I intentionally moving them, across this CRM or like through this funnel?
I love that. It lines up so much with sort of like my philosophy, and like, that's kind of how I broke it up in the book too. So I think that works really well. What tactics do you tell people? So, okay, like that first step, right? Awareness. And in my book, I just call it, they need to know you, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
That's the know phase. If they don't know you exist, they can't book you, right?
Exactly.
And so like if you're emailing someone, or if you talk to someone in person, it's pretty easy to, if they respond, they know who I am, right? It's pretty clear. But if you're making social media posts, or if you're replying on their social media posts, is there like a signal that you look for? Like, okay, they liked my reply, so now they know me. Is it like that simple, or is it a little more nuanced than that? Before Hayley answers that, I want to remind you that we have the only interactive full curriculum of online design and animation training on the planet. The fall 2024 session is right around the corner, and you can learn Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, Cinema 4D, design, animation, illustration, and much more with help from industry pros and an amazing group of students from all over the world. You get unlimited feedback on your coursework, a super engaged community, monthly live streams, and much more. Head to schoolofmotion.com for all the details and reach out to our team if you have any questions. All right, back to Hayley.
Yeah. I think it's obviously because we're talking about it in broad strokes as well. Like we can just talk about social media if that makes it easier. But like when I think about awareness, attraction, action, advocacy, you can apply that to the whole part of your business. So it can be through the CRM, through social media, through everywhere. So if I was thinking, right, I'm going on LinkedIn, I'm trying to work with this person, right? So I can actually tell you an example. So I really want to work with a brand, right? It's a piece of software that I think, they'd be great partners for Motion Hatch. I was doing this myself, right? So what I did, I was like, right, I found this, I think I found the CEO and I found the marketing director, something like that. So I was following them for a while. Luckily for me, they're active and they post on LinkedIn. That's great. Thumbs up. That's really much more easy, obviously. So I would go and like his posts occasionally and comment. I did this like over a long time, over, a few months. And then what I did was then I emailed him, because then I thought what would happen. Obviously, like we had a little bit of back and forth. So then I would say that would be like the attraction phase, where, I've commented, he's replied to my comment, maybe I've commented something, and that happened like a couple of times. So I was like, okay, he might have some more name recognition, which is what I was going for, like more warmed up, I'm not just a random person cold emailing him. This is what I was trying to do, right? So then I was like, cool, okay, now we've had like a little bit of back and forth, so I would say that would be like the attraction phase. And obviously it's going to look different for different people. And sometimes what's happened, if you do that, people actually have like followed people and then even reached out to them for work, so it just depends, it's kind of a bit like you just want to stay top of mind because then maybe it'll hit before you get to direct emailing them. But if it doesn't, you've got the plan anyway. So then I emailed him and I was like, I basically did my pitch, which was like, this is what I want to do, blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, okay, like they didn't exactly want to do what I wanted to do, but now I've got a call with them. Do you see what I mean? So I'm like, now I've got a call with them. We can meet face to face. We can talk, and this is kind of what it's like sometimes with brands and direct clients. Like it's a little bit of a dance, it's like, I know you, you know me, like, let's build this relationship. It's probably, it's not going to get me, like this work instantly, it's a little bit different, obviously to a motion design project, but it's not going to happen instantly. But I want to build that relationship with them over time because I think that's going to be a valuable partnership for Motion Hatch and really helpful for our community, So, that's kind of what I'm doing and how I'm using this on the back end. So hopefully that sort of gives everyone an idea of like how it might work. And then sometimes you might be surprised and they might come to you. And then sometimes you might have to go through this and there might be like, a few calls or, different things. Like they might not, you don't know that they've instantly got work for you. But I think by following the process and the system, and obviously if you're doing this with like quite a few people at the same time and you're tracking it all, then it's more likely that you will get work out of it. So that's kind of how I would look at it. In terms of like actually emailing people, so the difference between a direct client and emailing an agency, what I always tell people is the agency or the animation studio, they know they need motion designers, right?
Right.
But if you're a direct client, you don't know. So it's just going to take longer. You might not have that project in mind, So you can, if you want to, you can do a little bit of both, but you have to be more specific about the direct clients, So when you email an agency, it looks different. So when we have our templates, in our courses about how to email, the direct client and the agency one looks very different because you're not trying to convince them that they need motion design, right? Which you kind of have to do with direct client. And also I'd say if you want to email a direct client and you can't get in touch with them on social, I would probably just email them what I call like gratitude email first. So let's think of an example. Say I really like a, sports and outdoors kind of brand. I might email the marketing manager, like saying, hey, and like thanking them for like the great, work that they do and like the new jacket they made or something like that, and you'd have to do this with kind of like you don't want to do this with like Nike. Do you know what I mean? Like it's probably not going to work, but think of all the people who are like, kind of doing this kind of thing where they might have a smaller team. I think it can work really well because then they'll be more directly involved with like the overall mission and all of that kind of stuff. And then you can kind of just reach out and you're just saying, hey, thanks. I like your stuff. You can just do that on LinkedIn DM. You can do it on email or like somehow if you can find a connection, that's even better. So say like, I wanted to work with that brand and you knew that person from the band, obviously I'm going to go to you and say, hey, Joey, can you give me an intro? You know what I mean? Like, that's better and that's going to be more effective. But if you really can't find any way to like meet them in person, warm them up on social media, I feel like this is like the next best thing is like, just send them a gratitude email, say thanks, don't ask them for anything and like see where that goes,
That's perfect. I love all of that. So let's jump to the end with advocacy, and I don't know if this is how you would use this term, but one of the things that that you mentioned already is that part of the game of being a freelancer or having your own business is people need what you do very intermittently.
Yes.
And so when they need it, they also need to think of you. And you may think, well, it's obvious they're going to think of me because they know who I am and they've been through my attraction phase, and so they know I'm good. So they'll think of me, but that's not the way it works, right? They may know of 10 people. Why are they going to think of you? So how do you, and I think to make this really tactical, we could talk about, artists who have like clients that they've worked with in the past and they have a list of 20 of them. What are you supposed to do with that so that you can constantly be at top of mind, or at least as frequently as possible? Like, what are the strategies you suggest?
Yeah, so I would definitely keep in touch with them. There's obviously different ways you can do that. You can just talk to them and say, hey, how's it going? Like, it depends on your relationship, right? People always want their like exact word. Tell me the exact thing that I need to email them all the time. And it's sometimes it's thinking about what's my relationship with them and what have we done recently? Like maybe you did a project with them like 2 months ago and they haven't updated you about that project. You can just check in with them and say like, it was amazing to work with you on that project. Just checking in, seeing like how it went. Like, did you have any further feedback from the client? Like something like this, it doesn't have to be always saying like, here's my availability, here's my work, like if they find that helpful. And what I used to do, I would ask them and say, is it helpful for me to email you regularly and say like, this is when I'm available? Some producers like absolutely love that, but some don't, like it depends, I think. So I would just think about different things you can email them about. Feedback is a good one. Asking for a testimonial. What other things? I think asking for a referral is really good because I think it's kind of sneaky because it's like, hey, just wondering if you knew anyone else who could use my services. And then most of the time what my students have found is then the client's actually gone, actually, we've got this project, so like they might not refer you or they might refer you, but quite a lot of the time it's like a sneaky re-engagement email as well. I really like it because you're not really directly asking them, but
that's brilliant. Yeah.
I that's like my favorite email, the sneaky re-engagement through asking for a referral. So I can put the template for that as well on that page on our site, motionhatch.com/School of Motion. If you go there, I'll pop that on there as well for everyone because I think it's just brilliant.
Yeah, that is brilliant. It makes me think of like when you have kids and then you find a good babysitter. Like if my babysitter asked me, hey, do you know anyone else who needs a babysitter? I would just book her more. I'd be like, nope.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're my secret. I'm not. Yeah, that's really funny. That's smart.
Yeah, and it's basically because you're just like staying top of mind, right? So you're just sort of thinking about almost like excuses of why I'm emailing this person, but you're trying to make it seem as natural as possible, right? So like even if you've done a new project and stuff like that, like it's absolutely fine. I think I've heard you talk about that before. So, all of these kind of things I think are really good. And it's just really helpful because you're obviously going to get a lot of work from your past clients. So having them in there and thinking about, well, how can I really turn these people into advocates or fans of mine is really key. And I think it's like often missed, especially if you like look in the kind of marketing world, it's like everyone's concentrating on like how to get clients, how to get customers, but no one's really thinking about like, but how do I really serve these people that have already hired me, booked me, given work to me, and how can I also empower them to, help me get more work?
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit. So you've got this awesome framework, and I know that this stuff works. I mean, this is pretty similar to the way I ran my freelance business. And all of these principles, what I like about it is they are universal. So, I mean, you're being very specific to motion design, and you're talking about LinkedIn, but all of these things work on any social media platform, email, messaging apps. It doesn't really matter. And so eventually, someone's doing all of this. They start getting really busy. And they're busy doing work, they're busy pitching, they're busy getting on client calls, and now they have to market themselves. And at some point, it probably makes sense, even for just like a really busy freelancer, like Connor, who we interviewed, the sports guy, he just hired, I'm pretty sure it's a freelance thing, but he hired a producer to help him, right? And so delegating, that's a huge step in someone's journey, right? As having a career. So how do you approach that? Like, how do you, when is it the right time to even think about like hiring help, for yourself, even if it's just freelance or contract, temporary? And how do you manage that kind of stuff?
Yeah, really good question. So let me tell you a story first, because I feel like hopefully it's relatable. But
love stories.
Basically, I was like really busy and I got up to this like, where you're like, I'm getting burnt out. I'm absolutely at capacity. I can't do anymore. What I need to do is hire someone else. Like that's what everyone jumps to, right? They're like, yep, we need to hire someone else. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it's not so good thing. You definitely need to be prepared, and we can talk more about that. But in this story, what happened was I hired this person, and because I didn't have any systems and processes in place already. And it was kind of just like whatever was in Hayley's brain and trying to force it into this other person's brain, which is never fun and never a good idea, right? And
Right.
I feel like that was like one of the most stressful years that I've been in business. It almost caused like more stress and really put me off hiring, right? Because although like I think potentially it could have been the right person, I think it was slightly a wrong fit as well, which probably didn't really help. But and that's because I didn't have the processes in place at the beginning when I was trying to hire and know what I was really hiring for. But the big thing was that I didn't have systems in place, so I couldn't easily communicate how I like things done, right? So when someone's thinking about hiring, this is what I always tell them. You need to know exactly what your processes are and how you like to work. And you need to have this like documented. It's like so boring, and I know everyone hates it, but
Right.
I feel like even if you're just working on your own, if you document your processes, it will make your life so much easier. So let's go back quickly to talking about social media. When I was saying about batching LinkedIn posts, right? You need to have like a process document of, okay, this is what I do on the Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. I open Taplio and then I look at my posts and like I expand on them. I think this is my framework I'm using for all my social media posts. Do you know what I mean? Because it's very specific, and we teach people frameworks of like how to lay out the social media and stuff like that. So you could just copy and paste that in. But if you don't have that all written down and document, it's so easy to forget. And then you open your laptop and you're like, oh, I need to write a post, and what am I supposed to be doing? So if you start doing that now before you need to hire people, by the time you hire someone, then it's just easy, because then you just go, here you go. And I also like to record myself doing stuff, right? If I think I'm like working away and I think I really don't enjoy doing this, the first thing I think is, can I automate it somehow? Can I link apps up? Can I make it easier by creating a template, like something like that? And then I think, okay, let me record what I'm doing, so eventually I can hand that off to someone else. So I didn't do this, and it was like really the worst year on record for me, because I spent all my time managing this person. It didn't really work out. I was trying to tell them all the time like what to do, and it was just a nightmare. So I think this building systems and processes out in your business, it sounds really boring, but what it can do is it can help free up your time. It can help you to know exactly what you're doing and when, so you just have less stress and less overwhelm. I'm all about that. I'm like, how can I make this quicker? How can I make it easier for myself? And then also, if you do get to that stage where you want to hire other people, not everyone does, and not everyone that I work with wants to do that. Then you can also have like an easy playbook or a handbook that you can hand over to this person, and then you can do that. And then the other tip that I have with hiring is you should do what I call the 3 lists of freedom. I'm pretty sure I stole this from Chris Ducker. Gotta give him a little credit there. What you should do when you're thinking about hiring someone is do your 3 lists of freedom, because what I've found when people go to hire, generally they will think about, okay, I'm a motion designer, I definitely need another motion designer. But maybe that's not actually the task that you want someone to do, so you need to find out what they are. So you can use the 3 lists of freedom, and I learned this from an entrepreneur called Chris Ducker, and it's what you can't do, what you don't like doing, and what you shouldn't be doing, right? So you think about, like, everyone's aware of the stuff that they don't like to do, right? But what's the things you shouldn't be doing? Potentially, like, your accounting, maybe building your website, maybe doing your branding. I don't know. There's like endless things. So what you don't like doing, what you shouldn't do, and what you can't do, potentially accounting is actually in that one. But, and think about those things and list them out. And then what you can do is you can actually go through and highlight, all in the list, the tasks that potentially could be like one job role, if that makes sense. So you probably have like multiple job roles in that, and you might be like, well, I can't hire all these people at once. But what it does give you is sort of like a future forecast of the people that you might like to hire and what you might like to take off your plate and give someone else potentially in the future. And that has been really, really transformative for me.
Yeah, that's great. And, I'm thinking of, the really amazing creative artists out there that are used to doing like what we were talking about at the beginning. Just every job you do is bespoke. It's custom. and every client's different, and you're pitching differently, and everything's different. And so it's kind of hard. I think it's easy when we've been talking about social media, for example, and you've done a really good job of making it clear, like, okay, you could build a system where you just follow this system, and you have to be creative and think, but you just follow this. And if you can follow it, someone else can follow it. Voila, we've operationalized it.
Yes.
But what are some other things that you could do? Like, if I think about when someone like Connor, who's getting really busy, he's getting a lot of requests for work. He's getting too many. He needs someone to filter those and probably do initial client calls and things like that. But if I think about, okay, how would I systematize that process, which feels like, well, you're talking to people. It's very personal, and everyone's different, and every job's different. What are some things, like some tips maybe you have for operationalizing things like that it's not so obvious? It's not like having a posting schedule and stuff like that.
Yeah, so one thing that one of the studios I worked with did that was like really transformative, it's such a simple thing, but he was like, this just one thing helped me so much, was he set up basically like a calendar link, like on Calendly, and where people could book to have a meeting, because usually you'd get a request and then people would come on the meeting. But what he was finding it hard to do was like filter people out and like, do they actually have any budget and stuff like that? So on his calendar link, he actually had like a few questions that made sure when he was putting all that time in and doing all the more personal stuff, that he was actually getting the right qualified people on the call. So they're like little mini systems. And like when you're answering emails and stuff like that, always have like templates ready. And it's not that you're going to send that exact template, but it's just like a starting point, right? Because obviously you need to like adjust things, but there's going to be stuff in a project that you always need to know, right? Like, what's the aspect ratio of it? Like, what's your budget? They might not answer it, but you might as well put the question in there, and all of these types of things where you can have almost like a little step before you chat to them, like a mini survey. And it might not be appropriate for all clients, but that's something that's definitely helped a lot of people when they've been working like as a studio or like with more direct clients and things like that. So that's what I would be starting to think about. How can I make this process as easy as possible? Follow-up stuff. I use a CRM now called Folk app. We've also got our own CRM in our courses, but if you want something more robust that is going to be really, really helpful with like automating the follow-up and stuff like that, I think that's really good because you can set reminders in it. You can actually do like a 4-sequence email, and you can kind of do like almost like a mail merge, but then you can go in and personalize each one. I love that. So you're sort of sending the same, like roughly the same thing to maybe your past clients, but then you're like going through and like adjusting it based on them and who they are, and I think that's really important. So although you're trying to send out a lot of emails, you'll very much personalize it. And I know that you have talked a lot about this too. So I think just doing little things like that really helps me just to save a bit of time. And also just because, you might forget to follow up. So if you've already set it up so it says, okay, in 7 days time, send another email to this person unless they reply, like, which is what it does, then, you're winning, aren't you? So.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny, you're the second person this week to tell me about Folk, so I'm going to have to check it out. Now, I'm still using Streak, which is like a plugin for Gmail, basically, and it works really well. But because it's built on top of Gmail, it's like kind of beholden to Gmail's limitations and stuff. So, yeah, that's really, really good. And I was also thinking about, like, it's really good to automate as much of that sort of intake, that initial information gathering and stuff like that. But are there other things like, I don't know, the way you handle invoicing, the way, asking for, and I'm thinking of things specifically that you could hire someone else to do for you. Right? Yeah. Things that you could do yourself, but you shouldn't because your time is more valuable, right? Like spending an hour making your invoice look nice and double checking the math and all of that. You could be charging much more per hour if you were actually animating, right? Yeah. So maybe you could have someone else do that. What are some other examples of stuff like that?
Yeah, I think it's like, it depends on the person, right? So the person that comes to mind when you talk about things like that is someone maybe like a virtual assistant or an executive assistant. And I feel like this kind of stuff is really alien to everyone. They're like, what? Because it's not quite like someone who would be like a producer. And I think that's like, for a lot of people, that's maybe not the stage. They don't need a producer. They don't have enough projects to have like a project manager, right? But like kind of, I guess like the rung below that would be someone like an assistant who could do more of the admin based stuff. And yes, you're going to need the systems and processes in place. They're not going to understand like all of the things, but they can kind of filter out a lot of the emails. And a lot of these people, especially virtual assistants, they work online. They're used to having like, they maybe only work with you 2 hours a week or something like that. You know, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I've got to hire this person like full time and all of that kind of stuff. So I think doing that kind of thing is really good. And they could help you know. I know some people have worked with people where they're doing like, they'll do kind of like the bits where they'll take a case study and they'll break out like the social media post for that case study. Like that's something that we teach people to do, you know, because you can take the different parts of the case study. So for example, like the final video, and then you can take like the behind the scenes part of it. And then you could take like the results, like what did the client actually achieve from this? And then you can take the testimonial, you know, like that. Ideally, that's like a great case study. You might not have all those parts, but they could do something like that where they go and look at all your case studies and they break down each of the social media posts for that. You're probably going to have a bit of time where you're like checking that a bit, but eventually they'll probably get pretty good at doing that if they're like familiar with you and they work with you over a little while.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, we've talked about like, I mean, this has been a dense, like strategy-filled conversation. This has been awesome. So I know like people listening may be slightly overwhelmed because we've talked about a whole lot of things, and we didn't even talk about everything. I mean, you know, like you'll have to come back and we'll talk about like sales funnels and how to actually optimize your portfolio and all that stuff too. But if people listening to this are like, okay, this is what I need to learn how to do all these things. You know, go to Motion Hatch. Hayley teaches this stuff. She's very good at it. She's helped a lot of people. So what should people do if they want to learn more about Motion Hatch, about your programs? Do you have like beginner programs? Like how should someone start to kind of engage with this information?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously we have a podcast and a YouTube channel and all of that kind of stuff. So if you like search Motion Hatch on Spotify or on YouTube, you're going to find like so much content, right? So there's a lot of stuff there and there's lots of things to learn. So feel free to do that. I'm going to make a page specifically for everyone listening. So please go to motionhatch.com/School of Motion, because I'll put all of the relevant resources that I mentioned on there. And I think that's really the best way. And through that, you'll get on our newsletter, and then obviously we'll send you lots of resources and lots of good stuff on there as well. And I feel like that's just the best way to get started. And then, you know, obviously if anyone's interested in learning more about the courses and things like that, they can go to motionhatch.com. And, you know, I'd love it if people would come and follow me on LinkedIn as well. If you just type either follow Motion Hatch, and you can follow me if you just type in Hayley Akins as well, then you can find me there.
I love it. See, that's how you market yourself right there. Everybody watching, just do that. That's how it's done. Awesome. Thank you, Hayley.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Did you learn anything new in this episode? Leave a comment and let us know. We're really curious what resonates with the community. Make sure you head to motionhatch.com/School of Motion to get those resources that Hayley talked about and to learn about the various ways that Motion Hatch is helping artists level up their business skills. That's it for this episode. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of the upcoming guests that we're talking to, as well as our weekly Motion Mondays news roundup videos. Those have been really popular. And that's it. Have an awesome day. I'll see you next time.